back to HTML div part 2, a continuation of our previous lesson, div part 1. Today's lesson put the focus on an inline block, flex, and grid. All of these things talk about how to position divs, especially multiple divs, around each other. Mainly side by side, I would say, because div by default, well, multiple of them, they get positioned top to bottom. Okay, so it's a row, but we want it to be like it's a column, but we want it to be like a row instead. So these are the different methods that we can take to achieve that effect. First, with inline block. Inline block is a display property. Divs are block elements, and if you remember from my previous lesson, block elements take up whole space, left to right, whole space, and they position themselves as a column, top to bottom. So you can change that, obviously, to inline block, and this will remove the line break before and after the div element. Plus, they will be displayed side by side, multiple divs, okay? We can do this in style, external CSS, inline CSS, with div and display inline block. That's it. Next up is flex. So flex is a layout that was initially introduced to make dynamic and responsive website design easier to code, and you don't have to use float or changing display because they can get kind of clunky, and float wasn't meant to position divs in the first place. People just happen to use that out of practicality. Here I have a class, it's a class with a dot, div container, display flex, and then next up you need to handle all of the divs that are in the div container and assign them a width. You can do this with percentage, pixel. Lastly, with grid. Okay, grid is another great method to design dynamic and flexible layout with rows and columns. You can very much see it as designing using tables. It is very, very similar to flex, but it has the extra customization of allowing you to adjust and resizing the row, the row and the column, and you can position the row individually. However, it requires div elements to be surrounded by another div, and you have to specify the width of each column, okay? So let's take a look at the code over here. In the style tag, we have a grid container class, and the display is set to grid, and the grid template columns, to specify the columns, 20%, 20%, and 20%. I will show you in a bit. So to work on inline block, I'm going to showcase to you, inline block, flex, and grid. So let's have a little comment. First grouping. Let's go down here with a bunch of div. Let's give it a class as well. Let's make this one yellow. Okay, yellow. Let's copy and paste a bunch of times. Let's go down here and let's have a second grouping. This time, it is red. Now, lastly, third grouping. Copy. First, let's work with inline block. Yellow. Display. Inline block. Next up, let's work with flex. Display flex. Lastly, let's work with blue. Display grid, template columns, we'll make it 15%. 15% 3 times, 10%. And let's have all of the div be of the same width. 200 pixel. Oops, I almost forgot. Background color, yellow. Background color, red. Lastly, background color, blue. Okay, so as we can see over here, for yellow, it kind of worked. But let's work through them one by one and how this certain iteration of our code doesn't really work. So with yellow, it's not really side by side, isn't it? Why is that? Well, because they've ran out of space. This yellow is too big. So let's make the width into 50 pixel. There you go. Now they're side by side when they have enough spaces. Okay. Next up is red. Now, why doesn't red work? Well, if you remember, we need to put red in a div container. So let's do just that. Div class red container. Okay. The reason why I'm showing you all of these coding and working through the issues one by one is because I've encountered these problems when I first started with the whole repositioning thing, and it got me really frustrated. So I just wanted to, go through them one by one and sort of explain to you why this works and why this doesn't work. Red container, display flex background color, okay. Since we already specify here that all of the div have width 50%, let's see if it works with, this red container, because all of the class red over here are already 50 pixels. There we go. As you can see, it's side by side, but for red, it's quite small. So let's get rid of this, actually. One size doesn't fit all with 100 pixels. Let's see if that works. Now, since blue, with div, it's blocked. The display is blocked, so, it takes up the whole space. Plus and minus margins and paddings as well. So as you can see, the difference between inline block and with flex takes out all of the margin and the padding. So if you want to, customize margins and paddings, perhaps it would be easier to go with flex before inline block. They have their own, their own format over here. You can clearly see the difference between yellow and red in terms of spacing. Now let's work on blue. So what blue is missing is a container, just like red. So I'm going to create that. Class blue container. Whoops, almost forgot. Copy, cut actually. Paste it down here. Have the proper indentation. And change this to blue container. Now there we have it, but it looks a bit weird, so let's give it proper width. So if you adjust these numbers over here, you can adjust the columns. Let me show you. There we go. Just trying to make these bigger. See how it looks? Whoa, very big, okay? It even overflowed out, so this is what you get when an element overflowed out. Now, I don't want it to be like this though. I want it to have a scroll. So I'm gonna put overflow auto. Okay. Now we have a scroll on the blue container element. Very convenient. So thank you for tuning in and watching today's lesson. I hope that you enjoyed and you understand it. Our next topic is going to be class attribute, which is something that we've seen before. It's very unanimous and it'll do you many goods later on the ID as well. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Learn today, better tomorrow. Goodbye.